lots going on here, Don. We there's a few things we want to talk about. I want to get your take on. We have obviously this free speech attack by Trump, with arresting the protesters and cracking down on anti-Semitism. We also have some stuff going on in Ukraine and this Ukraine deal. That doesn't seem like the ceasefire deal isn't that great after all. We have Trump going after Thomas Massie, and we have the AIPAC problem that's in Congress that we know about. Any of these issues stick out for you? You want to start with, because I want to get to all of them, or anything else you want to talk about as well.
To me, I don't think we're spending enough time. Not you. I mean,
yeah.
Spending enough time looking at the phenomenology underneath all of the the deep doo-doo show that everybody talks about. Massie versus Trump, like it's rock'em sock'em robots, and and very little background information, really. Damn, excuse me.
No problem.
In the hands of the people that are involved, Massie has been sort of a stock libertarian right-wing ideologue, and the Fed, and make it like do actual responsible financial funding of the budgets, individual bills for individual programs instead of giant, truckloads of pork barrel nonsense, all individually reasonable, Second Amendment, First Amendment, all these different things, so that has a voice in the Congress, just like people that have other opinions on these different issues have a voice in the Congress. And those voices kind of match the leanings of the people in each of the districts. You got 435 House representative districts, and 2 Senate seats in each of the 50 states. The political leanings of the people in each of these places are different. When you're talking about 435 representatives across 50 states, you're talking about somewhere between 5 and 10 in every state. So in a place like New York, you've got New York City, then the suburbs around New York City, Long Island, Westchester, Rockland. And then you've got the Albany area, which is the upstate government administrative area, and the businesses that came up around that. And then the rural areas between what I've just described, then Buffalo and Rochester. They're all very different, in every way. Even the accents are different. The people's colloquial accents or the local accents. Their ideological, to use that term, it actually pains me to use it anymore because it's so inappropriate for what we're actually talking about. But the sort of a liberal conservative weighted issue pods vary from group to group. These people are in favor of full abortion rights. These people are in favor of abolishing abortion. These people are in favor of give everyone who wants it a sex change operation between ages 5 and 38. These people are like, if you wear the wrong colors, we want to throw you in prison. And everything in between for all of those issues, as if those were really the public policy matters that should be concerning us. The things about the container that we live in and that we can survive in. For example, a planet that hasn't suffered a nuclear war, an atmosphere that isn't contaminated with toxins, a water supply that's potable and drinkable and reliable, a shoreline that's relatively constant and not constantly seeing cities and villages and towns washed away because of flooding or whatever. All these things that are really important context for our actual lives are sort of off the table in the public discussions of public policy. And instead, these other things are the things that are discussed. And there's a wide variety of sentiment across the map on those issues. And those are the things that are played up in the political campaigns that put the people in Congress. And then when you're doing something like passing a budget or, making some other, functioning decision making, a lot of that the sort of the notes get played to see what kind of chord comes out. Massie has been in favor of not doing what they call continuing resolutions, meaning that you have a budget that has to be formulated and submitted and approved and signed within a certain time frame every year. If it isn't done, then the funding for the government ends when whatever was appropriated up to that point is spent. This is what they call a government shutdown. Most people don't know what I just said. A lot of people won't even understand what I just said, even though I said it in very simple terms. And yet they have very strong feelings about it because they're told to. Bernie Sanders feels this way about it. Donald Trump feels this way about it. This must be the evil position. This must be the good position, or vice versa. That's how this whole game plays out. And so what we're looking at when we're looking at a public feud, say between Trump and Massie in this particular case, and some of the other players too, we're actually looking at people going back to their base and playing the notes, to make the chord that their constituents will respond to give them a free hand to go in and do whatever the hell they're really actually going to do. One of the things that Trump is preoccupied with right now, or in any event should be, and one of the things that's pending in front of him, is the possibility of a resolution to what looks like the first couple of innings of World War III with Russia. In the process of trying to do that, as you've witnessed, for example, with that press conference with Zelensky, last week or whenever the hell it was, 2 weeks ago, there's a huge outcry from every establishment corner against Trump for whatever he said that didn't look like, let's write another check to Zelensky to take back to Ukraine so they can continue to fight and try to take down Russia. To me, that actual process there is the most important thing going on the planet right now, because the outcome of that is going to be the context for everything else. If there is a war with Russia, a knockdown, drag out war with Russia, then it doesn't matter when you submit the next budget. It's going to be all ash, radioactive steam and ash. The context for the budget discussions, for example, could include suggestions by people, including like hints from Trump, that you could cut the Pentagon budget in half. Things like this are not anywhere in the conversations that are being held and that are, on all of the talking head programs and all of that. And these are the fundamental things, though, that, our lives are going to take place in that context going forward. It'd be nice if people were given some, at least, sketch of what these things are and how they operate, so that they could then give some, thread of input into the decision making that's going to have major effects on their lives and the lives of everyone around them. So that's kind of my, it's long-winded. I'm long-winded. That's my nature. But that's kind of the way I'm looking at each of the things you listed. That right now you've got the war, the possibility of some sort of global general, if not disarmament, de-armament, down to some fraction of what it is right now. A reconfiguration of the global economy, going from what they called globalization, which is not the same, by the way, as internationalization or internationalism. Globalism being this thing that was constructed the post World War II and then post the 1991 Soviet Union collapse, with the United States, Europe, Korea, South Korea, Japan, and some others, feeding off to the rest of the planet, basically, and an encirclement of Russia and China, and the transfer of production to China, with the belief they were going to be able to do some sort of hostile takeover of the partnerships and joint ventures that had been constructed. And in fact, none of that's played out the way it was planned. I guess just in a very short, like I can do that. In a very short statement of things, after World War II, we saw two blocks emerge: the U.S., which had basically occupied Western Europe and Japan, and took over Japan's occupation of South Korea and other parts of Asia, took over some of the other colonial powers' occupations, like the French and Indochina, etc., and built up. The United States had its unique in the world, pretty much. Its industrial base entirely intact at the end of the war. The Soviet economy, the Soviet industrial base, which had been constructed, over maybe 150 years, but really rapidly from the early 1930s, was devastated. The World War II, the bulk of European World War II was fought between Berlin and Moscow, and that real estate. And so almost everything in there was, destroyed or severely beaten back. And so in the ruins of Europe, you had to rebuild with help from outside. And we had the help from outside. We had the industrial base. You guys need toilets and sinks and cars and, toothpicks and whatever the hell else. How many? And we ship them over. People here get rich. People there are on a lifeline to the people running things here. And this is all aimed at the Soviet Union, which was not allowed to participate in the post-war reconstruction of Europe. And instead, after it had acquired the countries closest to it, to forestall another ground invasion for a while, from like Germany through Poland and etc. They tried to rebuild themselves underneath, as the U.S. encircled them with weapons and threatened, war. That's 1945. So 1950, and you have a revolution in China in 1949, and an alliance, at least a temporary alliance, certainly an alliance of rhetoric from the other side between the Soviet Union and China, that are outside of the construct that's being put together, that ended up being what they called, the West, or the U.S. and its allies. There was a period from, say, 1953, 1954 until the 70s, with a couple of real hot spots: Berlin airlift and the Cuban Missile Crisis, as they call it, Vietnam War, Korean War, Vietnam War, where they looked like a hot war would flash, but generally there was a cold war that didn't involve major military battles, and instead was an ongoing geostrategic game to what they now call unconventional war. I forgot the term they use now is. So we end up going through all the way through the 70s, where we have détente, and you have which was a lessening of tensions and even some commercial activity. The China and the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact countries, or the Eastern European countries, were not allowed to participate in the global economy. In other words, in the economy that survived World War II, they were only allowed to have what they had left and could build under duress. And at some point in the mid-late 70s, that was opened up some, and a lot of financing of purchase of Western goods was allowed at the consumer level. You had a huge marketing apparatus in the West, Fifth Avenue and at Madison Avenue, all over the world. Our propaganda, from Jordache jeans to love and democracy and whatever the frig else they had. Everybody in the world got a heavy dose of this stuff, and everybody wanted it. It looked great on TV compared to their lives. They didn't realize we didn't have it either. They're just looking at it on TV. So when all of a sudden, here's some money, you like Jordache jeans? Here, buy some. We'll lend you the money to buy it. And Western consumer goods, which again created more profit here, were spread around, and they carried with it a whole ideological package, that whatever cultural package that undermined the sort of the relationship between the people and the state, and the state apparatus in the East. And then they cut off the supply, like around 1980, 1981. That's what we saw with Carter, when Afghanistan war started,
Right.
and then with the election of Reagan. And people who were wearing Jordache jeans and listening to Sony Walkman in the Eastern Bloc, and listening to death metal from here and all kinds of other crap, had their supply cut off. And now you could only buy them in stores in the Soviet Union if you had your hands on dollars or German marks or British pounds or whatever. And so what started happening was people started stealing everything that wasn't nailed down and going to hotels where international tourists and others were, and saying, would you like to buy a truckload of tomatoes for $8 and a pair of jeans? And over a period of a decade, ate out the economy from the inside, which led to the collapse of the economy in the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc countries. In China, beginning with Nixon at the beginning of this détente, they followed a different track, and the West capital said, we will help you develop with our money, our capital. We want to partner in this. And so a deal was struck that beginning in the late 60s, early 70s, and going up through like the early mid 80s, where joint ventures were set up between Western firms, either with patents for technological, things, and or with financing. And they built the stuff in China and then shipped it here. And the differential in labor was so great that it was worth the extra cost of shipping the material to China and then shipping the finished goods to New York or LA or wherever. And that went on and has still been going on, I would say, in earnest, from a little after the 80s, the early 90s. What was expected to happen was that they would be able to take down the Soviet Union on the one hand and China on the other, and therefore recapture everything that they had invested and win the war. And that almost happened. And that's why now you're looking at like basically a relitigation of the 80s and 1990 and 91 with Russia, and a whole sort of relationship with China, because you had in 1989, which is, we're talking the same time frame as 1991, and in 1990 the attempted coup in the Soviet Union. There was this Tiananmen Square incident. They tried essentially a coup d'etat in China in 1989, like a Western coup d'etat. It failed. And so now where we are is, instead of there being one happy world under the domination of whoever the hell it is that owns us, we have several economic blocks with military capacity, self-directed, like with the Russian strategic, forces, like China's military with God knows how many millions of people, and probably an inexhaustible supply of bullets and mortars and bombs and whatever the hell else they got. and an economic force, real, not finance capital economics, but the factories and raw materials and skilled labor and transportation and warehouse and all the other real economy features to maintain uh, half or more of the world in the face of whatever pressure is thrown out by the West. In other words, you now have actual multipolarity, and we're watching a drama of the development of that take place in front of us while we're talking about Massie and Trump and Chuck Schumer and Khalil and all these other things. You know, we're talking about Khalil a lot more than we talked about Gaza, not us, but
Right.
in the media. So this one guy being arrested, and look, I don't think that should happen. I don't even know. You know, some people are like, he's actually like a CIA, you know, jihadi dude. He's not exactly one of the, you know, one of the heroes of the resistance. I have no idea, and I don't care. You know, if it was Hitler's mother or whatever, you can't do this, and I'm opposed to it, and I'll call that out. But they're
Right.
using it as a rallying cry to kick Trump's feet out as he works through the issues of the Ukraine war. There's make no mistake about it. Every little thing that's being rolled out there right now is intended to put out. When they started poking into that war and doing some of the things, particularly in the last few weeks, that have been done in and around it, and sort of broadcasting what could be coming. I mean, all right, so he hasn't released the Epstein list. This is a big thing for some people. He may never release any of the lists of people that stole money in Ukraine either. But it sounds like they're getting their hands on it and stuff, which is enough for the people who have been involved all this time to scream like banshees. And they see the possibility of an actual change of ownership, I guess, of the you know, the world. I don't know, the apparatus. The elite is under attack by its own members. They know themselves better than anybody watching, or anybody than any of us watching know how horrible those people actually are, and that the last person you want gunning for you is one of those slime balls, because they have no scruples whatsoever. And so as they grapple with each other, I remember the thing about selling the last rope to the last capitalist, etc. Um, you know, it's going to be entertaining as hell, but it's also a very dangerous period, because the people on the other side of this who are watching it understand if it doesn't come out right, there's going to be a major war, and it's going to happen pretty quick.
So you're saying all the fast moving storylines that we're getting thrown in our faces all day, every day, especially the ones we mentioned this week. These are all distraction to an actual operation that's happening right now in Ukraine. That the real stuff's coming out there, and so let's distract us with these other stories. But that's the real deal right there, is Ukraine,
Well,
and the
okay.
stuff that they have to be very careful about. You're saying they have to be very careful about the what like the paper trails and everything. Are we getting as far into like the bio labs and all the Fauci and the Hunter Biden laptop stuff? Is that all still on the table? And we talked about, Zelensky is at the end of his rope. Are they trying to get him out of there while all this is happening as well? But are you basically saying that, Don, that these other stories are just distractions from that? That's the real.
I think it's more. I think it's more. I won't say complex, but more organic than that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, let's say I'm running a mall. I just have it contains like social, you know, location, and there's 100 people in it or whatever. So I've got a couple of guys I send out today. Go mug those two old ladies and rob that guy's TV, and do this or that. And so just low, medium level of looting and wreaking havoc or whatever, sort of like what people who are in the upper class do to the whole planet on a daily basis, but just to make it more visible. So each of these things somebody complains about, and you find out that they have a constituency. They robbed my TV last week too, or my mother's purse was taken last week by the same guy on a purple bicycle or whatever. And so little pockets of resistance, on this or that issue pop up. Each of the things that are being done, on large scale here are horrible. The thing with the virus, the coronavirus, etc., horrible. The mandatory vaccines, the shaming of people and the blacklisting of people, and all of that, horrible. The condition of the global economy, which has somewhere in the vicinity of 9 million people a year die of starvation annually, like for at least the last 20, 30 years. Okay. That's horrible. Little hot wars all over the world that have been burning since, never really went out after World War II. They take, 50,000 people here, say 1 million people in 2 or 3 years in Iraq, for example. And then sanctions like they had in Iraq, say in the 90s, 500,000 children die, killing the 20 or 40,000 children in Gaza, last year, and however many people have died over there since 1948 and earlier. All of these things are horrible. And so show me the person who's got a plan to end all of them and how viable it is. Of course, it's ridiculous. You have to have like a global democratic revolution that nobody knows how to organize because nobody knows what it looks like, and there's nobody with the power to organize it, and there's no mechanism to organize it. These things are going to evolve or not, and we're fighting against an organism that has computer networks and cameras and data and crunching and stuff everywhere that's self-directed and owned by a small group of people. So either we lay down or we fight. So where do we fight? First thing you have to do is survive. And the first fight then has to be no large wars. And so at the moment we have a war between the beast that's been doing all of this shit for at least the last 80 years now, and people that are outside of that have some wherewithal to resist. And so if you're not focused on that, solving that problem first, you're wasting your time, and whatever else problem you solve, it's like, deck chairs on the Titanic, more or less. Not to trivialize the things themselves, but contextually, you're on the Titanic and it's sinking. So maybe it's not deck chairs. Maybe it's open heart surgery being done on someone that's very important to do, or some other really important thing. You're on the Titanic, it's sinking. You're going to be at the bottom of the fucking ocean in like 20 minutes, no matter what happens here. That's where we are right now.
So the open heart surgery is the getting us out of the Ukraine war and ending this thing. A lot of people voted for Trump for that one reason. That was the one thing. They were a one issue voter, and it was very legitimate, substantial to say, I don't care about anything else about Trump. I care about ending this conflict. So they're banking on that right now. And you compare it to open heart surgery, and I say, yes, that's what it is. And we have to focus on it.
The metaphor, because actually, what I'm talking about isn't open heart surgery. Isn't stopping the war. Stopping the Titanic from sinking.
Stopping the Titanic from sinking. So whether you're on this Titanic as it's sinking, looking for a way to survive, climb up to the very top part, like stay alive as long as possible. Whatever the high stakes situation is, we know that when people are in high stakes situations, that's when they're most vulnerable for these other things to not put enough attention into. Like, for example, hey, while you're trying to survive on the Titanic, could you sign this thing real quick? Never mind what it is. It happens to just be the end of free speech as you know it, or right. Sign this. We're just going to do this other little thing. And of course you're going to be like, whatever you need me to do. I'm trying to survive the Titanic. So I think that we at the same time, yes, Don, there's distractions, but we also have to be aware that these other things are also affects people's lives, and also are things that they're gonna come back and hurt us later. Yep. Like when we make protesting illegal, and can hold people without due process. That was just one example.
All of that's all horrible. because
all
each
horrible
one of
stuff.
those things can stop us from stopping the Titanic from sinking too.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I'm saying it's more organic than that. I gotta go.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
put up a video for you to play if you want to. I heard this song. I'm a musician. I've been hearing this song like the rest of us for decades. But I heard this song in the car the other day while I was listening to some idiot try to explain why Trump won the election and not understand why. And so it's Allentown, Billy Joel. And I was like, how long ago was that? 1982. So the condition of the people in those swing states, the Rust Belt swing states, has existed since before 1982 enough that it became a national hit in 1982 because that condition was familiar enough and sympathetic enough to enough people to make it a hit. So the unrelieved suffering of the people who went through the deindustrialization of America found no champion whatsoever after the bullshit, whatever economics, voodoo economics of Reagan, and after they spent all the borrowed money and everything else. Their condition deteriorated on a straight line from like 1975 all the way down to the first time Trump said, I'm going to get your jobs back. No one had ever said, I'm going to get your jobs back. Clinton said, your jobs are never coming back. You're going to have to learn how to, program animation or whatever. And as if automobile workers weren't building cars everywhere else in the world. Instead, all they could do here is stand on a corner, score smack, and wait for something to happen. And Trump was the first person to offer something to happen. And apparently, last time he delivered enough of it to those corners that they turned out more this time. And no one is discussing this particular material essential fact in the discussion of everything else.
Thank you so much for the conversation, the insight. We always appreciate your perspective here on Homeless Left because it keeps us,
brother.
Yeah, it keeps us digging deeper and holding our standards higher because we got to do that as fellow journalists. And thanks for setting a high bar for us. I really appreciate it, Don.
Thank you, brother.